here today to hear God's story. We're going to hear God's story from the Old Testament. We're going to hear God's story from the New Testament. We also come here today to know how our stories intersect with God's story. Everyone has a story. Today, as people of faith, we gather. Let us visit with Isaiah. Isaiah 40, 21 through 31. Join with me responsively. Don't you know? Haven't you heard? Wasn't it announced to you from the beginning? Haven't you understood? Since the earth was formed. God inhabits the earth's horizon. Its inhabitants are like locusts, stretches out the skies like a curtain, and spreads it out like a tent for dwelling. God makes dignitaries useless, and the earth's judges into nothing. Scarcely are they planted, scarcely sown. Scarcely is their shoot rooted in the earth when God breathes on them and they dry up. The windstorm carries them off like straw. So to whom will you compare me? And who is my equal, says the Holy One.
Don't you know? Haven't you heard? Wasn't it announced to you from the beginning? Haven't you understood since the earth was founded?
Look up at the sky and consider who created these. The one who brings out their attendants one by one, summoning each of them by name. Because of God's great strength and mighty power, not one is missing. Why do you say Jacob and declare Israel? My way is hidden from the Lord. My God ignores my predicament.
Don't you know? Haven't you heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He doesn't grow tired or weary.
His understanding is beyond human reach, giving power to the tired and reviving the exhausted. Youths will become tired and weary. Young men will certainly stumble, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will fly on wings like eagles. They will run and not be tired. They will walk and not be weary.
Don't you know? Haven't you heard? Wasn't it announced to you from the beginning? Haven't you understood since the earth was founded?
And now God's story from the Gospel according to Mark, chapter 1, verses 29 through 39. After leaving the synagogue, Jesus, James, and John went with Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed, sick with a fever, and they told Jesus about her at once. He went to her, took her by the hand, and raised her up. The fever left her, and she served them. That evening at sunset, the people brought to Jesus those who were sick or demon-possessed. The whole town gathered near the door. He healed many who were sick with all kinds of diseases, and he threw out many demons. But he didn't let the demons speak because they recognized him. Early in the morning, well before sunrise, Jesus rose and went to a deserted place where he could be alone in prayer. Simon and those with him tracked him down. When they found him, they told him, "Everyone's looking for you." He replied, "Let's head in the other direction, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there too. That's why I've come." He traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and throwing out demons. May God add a blessing to the reading, to the hearing, and now to our unpacking of the Word of God. God's story. God's story intersects with our story. Today we have two readings Old Testament and New Testament. And they both invite us to look at life from a wider perspective. To go from self-interest to service, service to each other, service to the world. Today's two readings also invite us to pray. Pray the ordinary days and to pray the extraordinary days as well. These items, service to one another, service to the world, and prayer are very necessary components of people who have a life of spirituality, a life of faith. You and I have a theological view of God. We have a view of ourselves and we have a view of the world around us. And I contend that we all have a spirituality, a deep spirituality that is hidden within us or that we have been able to locate. And that spirituality needs nurturing. That spirituality needs practice. Theology and spirituality are intrinsically ethical in nature. As Archbishop Oscar Romero asserted, spirituality is not just about hearing God in our inner life, but it is also found when we serve others and are innately in tune and aware of all the suffering of those around us, especially the poor, especially the vulnerable. As spiritual and faithful people, we have a need to pray, and we have a need to serve one another. That's the way God created us. That combination of prayer and service opens us up to a deeper relationship with God and a wider relationship with the world around us. Earlier in our liturgy, we prayed the idea that our individual lives are a part of a greater story. That greater story is God's story, and it is always occurring. One of the reasons we have come here weekly is to hear God's story and how God's story intersects with our own lives, the own story. Our still speaking God speaks to us, and we wait with open hearts, open ears, open eyes, and open hands as we pray and worship God. God is present. God is faithful. The prophet Isaiah asked, have you not known, have you not heard, that God is both transcendent and immanent? God is out there and God is in here. God is among us and God is with us. The prophet Isaiah reminds us that the God of the universe is also the God of finite and fallible humans. The prophet Isaiah reminds us that the God whose eternity dwarfs our imagination is also concerned about the suffering in the world. And God is concerned how we, the faithful, respond to the suffering that is around us in the world. The prophet Isaiah also reminds us that those who wait for God's will renew their strength. The prophet Isaiah reminds us that those who wait for God will have the fortitude to persist and to outlast the challenges they face. One of the things that waiting in Isaiah refers to is prayer. Over the past 2 to 3 weeks, I have felt extra strength. I have felt extra energy to face the challenges that came after my fall on the ice. I feel it. I feel the Spirit because of you. You all were praying for me. I was renewed on the wings of your prayers. I was facing a setback, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited while you prayed and prayed and prayed. I want to say thank you. That is how things work. In God's world, in God's story, in my story, in your story. I was strengthened because I waited, and I waited in your faithful prayers. This is one of the benefits of belonging and attending a community of faith. When one of us needs strength, the others wait on them with prayer and strength. And that strength is present for the one who needs it, the one who needs to be lifted up on godly wings. The prophet Isaiah invites us to pray. Pray the ordinary days, and yet also pray the extraordinary days as well. Pray the ordinary days and pray the extraordinary days, and renew your strength, and renew it by being lifted up on godly wings. In our Gospel of Mark, the New Testament story, the writer describes a day in the life of Jesus. He teaches, he heals, he has exorcisms, he's going from dusk to dawn. No healing is too large or too small for his attention. The story concludes with Jesus going to a deserted place for prayer before the sun comes up the next day. His time of prayer connects him with God and gives him a clear sense of his mission. His time of prayer with God lifts him up on godly wings. Throughout Mark's gospel, there is an action and contemplation, and they are seen as interdependent. Jesus is always on the move, constantly responding to the human need. Yet Jesus regularly retreats for prayer and reflection. Even Jesus needs to have his strength renewed. Even Jesus needs to be lifted up on godly wings. Even Jesus needs to pray the ordinary days and pray the extraordinary days as well. Moments of quiet, such as the one described in Mark, enables Jesus to connect on a deeper spiritual sense to the source of his power. Before Jesus retreats to prayer, we see Jesus offer someone new life. He offers someone a new connection in life. Who is this person who is lifted up on godly wings? Her name is never mentioned, but her title identifies herself as Peter's mother-in-law. We never hear of Peter's wife, but we are introduced to Peter's mother-in-law in this passage today. And we are introduced to her, as we are introduced to her, we find out she is very sick. She is in bed. She has a fever. Jesus immediately turns his attention to her needs. He went to her, he took her by the hand, he raised her up, the fever left her, and then it says, and she served them. Jesus offers her new life. Jesus lifted her up on godly wings. We need to understand that the Greek verb egarin, which is the same word for resurrection, is used in this passage. Mark uses the same verb when he tells of Jesus raising the little girl from the dead in chapter 5 of Mark. He also uses it in chapter 14 when Mark refers to Jesus' resurrection. And in each case, the verb is God's power that makes resurrection possible. In each case, it is upon godly wings that these lives are renewed. In verse 31, it says, the fever left her and she served them. Peter's mother-in-law, once healed, begins to serve. Some women today find this story offensive because it says the woman's place is in the kitchen. Does it though? Some men abuse this passage today to explain and expound away on the differences between men and women and gender roles in their myopic view of the world. However, it is possible for us this morning to see this story in a very different light. It is necessary to read this story and see God's kingdom and Jesus' welcome, that being an extravagant welcome. Jesus did not look at gender. Jesus looked at the heart of everyone he came in contact with. Jesus called the person. Jesus didn't call them by gender. A quick jaunt through the Gospel of Mark gives us a glimpse of Jesus' extravagant welcome seen more and more. Jesus honors women by making a woman the subject of this miracle today. But also in chapter 5, Jesus will heal and raise Jairus' daughter from the dead. Jesus will heal a woman with hemorrhoids later in chapter 5. Women are also among those who are healed when the whole city encamps around Jesus' door in chapter 5. And at the temple in chapter 12, it is the poor widow who gives more than anyone else that Jesus uses as an illustration of faithfulness. A woman pours costly nard in chapter 14 on Jesus' feet as a sign of what will later become the anointing of his body for burial. And when Jesus is crucified, Peter will deny him, chapter 14, and the other disciples will be nowhere to be found, but a number of women will be present with him. Mary Magdalene, the mother of James, and Salome will bring spices to the tomb to anoint Jesus' body. They are the first witnesses to this empty tomb in chapter 16. Women are lifted up on godly wings in the Gospel of Mark. Why? Because Jesus offers everyone an extravagant welcome. Women have equal value in Mark's Gospel. Let's go even a little further. I want to point out that the word serve found here in Mark's narrative is not the same word that means go to the kitchen and make sandwiches. You understand? That's not what this word is. No, the word here is interpreted in the Greek as diaconate, to deek. She is deacon. In fact, many scholars point to this story in Mark and surmise that the very first deacon in Jesus' ministry, the very first deacon mentioned in the Bible, is a woman. And it is Peter's mother-in-law. What is a deacon? A deacon is one whose life is defined by service to another. A deacon also is a lay person that can be elected by a church body with congregational polity to serve in worship and to offer pastoral care and to hold offices in the church. And in the Gospel of Mark, men and women are called to serve. Men and women are called to deek. We are, in fact, you and I, called by God to deek, to serve one another. We are called to a lifetime of service. Service to each other and service to the world is as godly as it gets. Like prayer, our service to one another is a very serious and necessary component to our spiritual lives. One of the greatest deaconesses in our lifetime, I would say, was Mother Teresa. And she had this to say about service and the link to one's quest for happiness. Being happy means, she said, loving as Jesus loved, helping as Jesus helped, giving as Jesus gave, serving as Jesus served, rescuing as Jesus rescued, being with the Christ that are around us for 24 hours, and touching Christ in his or her distressing disguise. Mother Teresa is someone we've all heard of, but have you ever heard of Cliff Dockerman? Anybody? Cliff Dockerman? He was the past president of the Rotary International. He cleaned up an outdated and old Russian toast. Here's the old toast, the Russian toast. If you want to be happy for an hour, get drunk. If you want to be happy for a month, get married. If you want to be happy for a lifetime, have good friends. But this is what Cliff wrote. If you want to be happy for an hour, take a nap. If you want to be happy for a week, go on vacation. If you want to be happy for a month, get married. If you want to be happy for a year, find a way to inherit a fortune. If you want to be happy for a lifetime, help people. And if you don't listen to Mother Teresa's testimony or to Cliff's toast, perhaps you will listen to Lumiere, the candlestick manservant in Disney's Beauty and the Beast, when he says, a servant who's not serving isn't whole without a soul to wait upon. We started off today's meditation asking ourselves to look at God's story, to look at our story and see how they intersect, to look at life from a wider perspective and to go from self-interest to service to each other and to the world. We have been asked and employed by Isaiah to pray the ordinary days and to pray the extraordinary days, that we might renew our strength as individuals and as a corporate body. Those items, serving one another, finding strength and new life in prayer, are necessary components of a spiritual life. We are all in need of a deeper and wider spiritual life. And that is what God invites us to, not only today, but every day. Go and pray. Go and serve. Go and be a deacon. Amen.
Amen.